Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration. If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restore the glory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory. Hey, Bob, good to be back with you again. We are continuing on in our series on healing and leadership, and we have a very special guest with us. Again, our series is full of special guests, and this one has a really cool history that I'll share a very quick story, and Bob, you can introduce them. This gentleman had a huge impact on my wife's life, and I don't think without him that we would be where we're currently at. It's amazing how the kingdom of God works and the Spirit of God moves. So one of my wife's major conversion moments happened via this man at a conference, personally and directly. So I'm very grateful to him. But Bob, I'll let you introduce who's our guest.
Oh, I'd be glad to. Want everybody to meet Peter Herbeck, who's from Renewal Ministries. He works there with Ralph Martin, and they have had just tremendous influence in the church and bringing renewal in the Holy Spirit. And Peter's become a good friend over the last several years. Every time I go up to Michigan or he comes down, we hang out and we have fun playing cornhole together at one of the conferences.
Ooh. You mean fun losing or what?
Don't ever play Bob. You're going to lose.
Oh, he is the king of cornhole.
Overstated. But it's just been a joy to get to know you, Peter, and just know that you have impacted so many lives around the world. And you are a humble leader who's been willing to go into your own story. So if you want to share any more, and I've also met Debbie and your daughter Rachel and all of you involved in ministry. And I know you have 4 children, several grandchildren. So I don't know what else you want to share about yourself, Peter.
Yeah, we have 9 grandchildren and one on the way.
Yeah, awesome.
So we're multiplying quickly. It's great.
You're catching up to me with 10.
Yeah, and I love being a grandpa. You know, I really like my kids, but I love my grandkids. No, I'm just kidding. I was like, it's great. We got most of them live in the area. Right around the Ann Arbor area here. And so we get a chance to see them regularly. And I find my grandkids to be therapeutic. You talk about healing. It's just some real precious moments of just being able to love them and be with them. And man, they bring joy to my heart. They just help my heart sing. And at days when I need it, it's great. So I'll just say, Deb, I'm going to go over and see I need some therapy.
Yeah.
I can't get anybody on the line. I can't find Bob Schutz, so I'm going to go hang out with my grandkids.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's so good.
I know that therapy. So that's great stuff.
I'm looking forward to those days. I don't. It's a bit. I'm not too far behind. It seems maybe in at least 10 years, I'll be where you guys are at. So that's exciting. Yeah. Peter, we kind of just dive right in. For Bob and I, it's funny. We feel like we live with scuba gear on. We're always ready to just plunge into the depths, and that's kind of our normal breathing area. And so we have the same questions we're asking every leader, every person we're bringing on, and everybody has a different perspective. But I'm really excited about what you bring, because you've been doing. Renewal Ministries, I think that's the perfect name. That's been my experience with your guys' work, is you're just renewing the church and all the various facets, from the hierarchy and the clergy down to the people who are just attending on Sundays. But the question we're kind of leaning into, first of all, is a bit more vulnerable question. And it's more about you and your story and your life. And so I'm just curious, to the degree that you're comfortable and willing and open to share just about how your personal story and maybe even some of the wounds that you've suffered has affected your leadership in the church.
Yeah, good question. I was trying to think about what might be the best way to go at this today, and that is probably the two areas. One is the biggest impact on my life, my early life, was my dad. And my parents had wonderful parents. My dad was a alcoholic. He was a, tank commander, Patton's Third Army, Battle of the Bulge. He
Oh, wow.
could speak fluent German, so he was in recon. He was at the liberation of Mauthausen concentration camp. He was there for almost 2 weeks, processing people out, interpreting, doing all this stuff. And like many of the men in even our hometown, who grew up in a small little German community in southern Minnesota called New Ulm,
Hmm.
other guys who fought, in the war, they didn't want to talk about their experience. And though Dad was a decorated war hero, Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts, all kinds of stuff, he just wanted to move on. So we grew up in a house. We had 7 kids. I was the second youngest of 7 kids, where, Dad's way of dealing with the trauma that he experienced in his own life was to drink, and as did a lot of his friends. It's really amazing how many guys in that generation. There was no place to go. You didn't talk about this kind of stuff. It wasn't manly to talk about it. Plus, you didn't want to talk to anybody. You know what I mean? You just want to get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he would do is once a week, once every 2 weeks or something, he would drink. He would, you just knew if he wasn't home at 5:30, he wasn't coming home till late. And when Dad drank, he would just get hammered, just hammered. And he would be, and ironically, it was the only time where he would talk about what was going on inside him in a strange way. He'd talk to himself. He'd be in a room next door. He'd be talking to himself, like he'd be talking out loud. And as a little boy, you hear this and you kind of grow up with it. And so anyway, there's a lot to that story. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but bottom line is, we had all the realities of a dysfunctional alcoholic home. On the one hand, Dad was very successful. He was a leader in the community, had a successful business. All my siblings were, we were all pretty normal, played sports, all were pretty good at it. My sisters were homecoming queens and cheerleaders, and they were all good students except me. But anyway, of the 7 kids, but everybody did well and everybody behaved pretty much except me. But which is kind of part of the story, and why I wanted to say this, that I never understood why, and I didn't really pay a lot of attention to. From a very, very early point in my life was just off. I just was going off the rails. I was constantly in school, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, pushing against teachers, getting in trouble, playing hooky in kindergarten, all this stuff. And then literally, when I see my 5-year-old grandchildren now, I kind of I cannot believe it. I was 5 years old and I was standing in line to take the bus down to the public school for kindergarten. And I grabbed 2 of my friends and said, let's get out of here. And so we go hide behind a school. The bus takes off. They're scared to death. I said, let's go to the park. So we go up to the park a block from my house in this little town. And we're playing on the swings and slides and climbing trees. And all of a sudden this police car comes by and stops. And I go, hey guys, let's get out of here. I'm 5 years old.
Wow.
And so we go hide and the policeman comes and gets us. And he knew, because small town, somebody said, hey, these boys didn't show up. And he puts us in a police car and I get taken home at 5 years old in a police car, And so it was like the beginning of a very unusual kind of troubled. And I think at the time it wasn't painful, but I ended up finding out later in life, there was a reason for what was going on in my life, and I got, so there were 2 things. One was the issues with my dad and the things we saw very traumatic things. As I got older, I got in very serious arguments and fights with my dad. I was really the only one who had that experience. And then we went through treatment with him, which God broke into our family. We lived a block from the Catholic Church. We went to Catholic schools, we went to mass every weekend and everything. And we kind of just thought, well, hey, this is our cross. Dad's alcoholism is our cross. And I don't remember, you talk about leadership. I don't remember ever having a conversation with an adult, face to face, heart to heart, in my entire upbringing until we went to treatment, about what might be going on in my life, what I might be experiencing.
Wow.
And is there a reason for why I'm acting out? I mean, I was like the canary in the coal mine. I was like, everything's not okay in the Herbeck house. You know what I mean? I didn't know that was happening, that's what I was doing, but that's a lot. The chaos and the disconnect that was there, I was sort of acting out in my life. So my first encounter with healing and transformation and sanity around these issues was when we went through inpatient treatment with my dad once a week when he had gone through treatment a number of times and it never stuck, but God kind of broke into our life just prior to this. And one of my sisters, the oldest sister, had gotten baptized in the Holy Spirit. And she was in a little parish community up in northern Minnesota. And she called home. I was a junior in high school, called home and said, hey, I'm bringing the kids home this weekend. You guys need to be there. I got to tell you something. And she sat us around the table and said, hey, I belong to this little prayer group. This was 1977. And first time I ever heard the words prayer group. There were not prayer groups back in the 70s, or maybe there were, but nobody talked about them, And anyway, she said they pray, they read the Bible, and then at the end of it, they pray for people's needs, and they've been praying for Dad for 6 months. And she said they prayed for him and others, and then she was going back to the car, and a local farmer who was part of the prayer meeting just came up to her and said, Kathy, I have to tell you something. As we prayed for your dad, I felt like God wants me to come and tell you that he's heard your cry, and he's heard the cry of your family. He's going to bring healing to your father. But it's important that your family, he didn't really know us, comes to the Lord, opens their heart to Jesus, because he can heal. He's going to bring healing, So my sister's saying this, I had 2 brothers and 4 sisters. My 2 brothers were on the coast, so they weren't there, but everybody else was there. My dad was out drinking, ironically, that night. And so my sister Kathy's like, she looked at us, she goes, you guys, Jesus Christ is alive. He's not dead, Nobody talked like this in our family. We never had a spiritual conversation like that our entire life. So, a current of grace was entering into our house that we had never seen before, and it came in the form of healing. It was coming in the form of a God who's alive and who heals, And I'm the only boy there, and I'm sitting there thinking, and I know my sister's not crazy, and she's so passionate, and she's like, she goes, you guys, it's about us giving this to Jesus now. Let's make Jesus the center of our lives. And some of us are like not real about this, in our faith. And some of you are really gone far off. And she looks right at me, and I was like, I was the only one. I was like, I won't even go there. I was just so off the rails. But anyway, that night I went to bed, laying in bed, and I prayed really for the first time deeply. And I love my dad. And I said, God, if this is real, please heal Dad. I got out of my bed and I got on my knees for the first time since I was a little kid.
Wow.
And I was crying, and emotions were coming up, that I'd never quite experienced, And so then I fell asleep, went to bed, fell asleep. And then 2 weeks later, on a Monday night, I was waiting up for my dad. That's what the boys would do, wait up for Dad. And I was the only one there, and I was doing homework, and which was a kind of miracle right there. They should have, that was a breakthrough was happening. He came and sat down next to me, and I didn't want to look up at him because I knew we'd get into an argument, And he said my name. He said, Peter. And I kept my head down. And then he reached out and he grabbed my arm, and he was a tank commander. He's an old athlete. He was strong, and he squeezed my arm and he was shaking. And he said, son, look at me. And I looked up at him, and he started to cry. Never saw my dad shed a tear my entire life. And he said, son, I'm a sick man and I need help.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there looking at him, and instead of being ready for just my heart melted, and out of my mouth came, it's okay. It's going to be okay, Dad. The Lord's going to heal. God, the Lord's going to heal. I'm saying this, and it's like I'm having an out of the body experience. Like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
And he got up and went into his home office and picked up the phone like 11:45 at night, called Doc Ringhofer, our old family physician, and he said, Doc, this is Joe Herbeck. I'm a sick SOB and I need help.
Wow.
And the next morning he went into treatment, 4 weeks, and he got up at the end of that last day there, We went with him, and he said, "My name is Joe Herbeck. I'm an alcoholic. I cannot live without God at the center of my life." And then 20 years of sobriety he lived before he died. All 7 kids came back to the Lord within 2 years. And it's because this was the key. Within 2 weeks, the hope of the gospel and the healing power of a living God came into our life.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's kind of moving my heart. It's like,
Amen.
yeah.
Amen.
Amen. A family that didn't have hope. Hope was born there, you know?
Amen.
And then the grace came for my dad for the first time to ever say in his life, "I'm sick. I need help." We once did, you guys are in therapy, imagine this, we once did an intervention with my dad. We had like 30 people in a room. He came home and everybody was there, and we had a professional and trained, and we all went around the room. Half the room's crying their eyes out. My dad didn't say a word the whole time. We got to the end, he goes, "Are you done now?" And he goes, "I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have a problem. Don't ever do this again." And he got up and walked out.
This was how long before?
I was a couple of years before that.
Wow.
You know, so
Talk
that was a
about
miracle.
miracles.
What was going on? So the reason I share the story is that was the first time that I saw that knowing Jesus meant the healing power of God can come to you. It's like, that's where it comes from. And I just, felt like this is a spiritual thing. So at treatment then was the first place in my life, first time, where someone helped me identify the painful and negative feelings that were inside me. Because you grew up in an alcoholic home, everybody's living in their silos. Yep. Everybody's playing their roles. Yeah. We're all walking around the elephant or whatever, you know what I mean? We're not talking about it, and have these traumatic experiences sometimes at night when dad comes home late at night. You don't even know who is this guy, and then the next morning everything's fine, and there's a kind of madness that sets in and a disconnect. And I think one of the things that impacted me, we were all impacted, but it's very isolating. And so I had, when I went through treatment with dad, it was about dealing with dad and then a kind of the family disease part of it. And so I remember, being asked to say out loud things that happened in my relationship with my father that hurt me,
Wow.
And it was super hard for all of us to do that, you guys. It was really hard. Like, something's wrong with this. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't say this. But we had this counselor said, no, your dad needs this. No, you need to be raw, honest, from your heart.
Wow. Yes.
And it turns out, in a strange way, I loved it. It was the first time I felt like I was living in the real world for the first time. I felt like somebody understands me. Somebody understands what's going on, So it was like, so that experience was transformational for me. And to have to remember events with my dad, like he used to announce our basketball games. He was the public address guy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And my brother Dan was a senior and I was a sophomore. We were playing on the same basketball team. If he ever listens to this, clearly I was better even as a sophomore. But anyway, the stats are there. Go look it up.
Yeah.
So anyway, so big game, packed gym. We're warm-ups we're having warm-ups and all this, and we're at the opposite end of the gym from the main door that comes in. Also, there's this big commotion at the other end of the gym. And somebody goes, "Hey, dude, Herb, look at your dad," And I turn around and the whole place just stops. And looking at him, and the athletic director, who was a longtime friend and understood that, was trying to get dad out of the gym. And it was unbelievable. I mean, I was so mad. I think I had a lot of points that night, but I was, it was experiences like that happen. And actually it happened and we never said a word about it. You know what I mean? Until treatment.
Yeah.
It's like it never happened.
Would you say humiliating was the experience?
Oh, just tremendously humiliating and embarrassing and shame. You just shame and family shame and all this kind of stuff. It's just one of a variety of events, And you don't know how to deal with. I love dad, but I hate dad. You know what I mean? It's almost like I have these feelings and I'm scared of these feelings that I have. And no one ever talked to us about how to deal with this until treatment happened. So I'd say that was a critical time for me to gain tools and to understand how important it was to really have the courage to address these things, So what I didn't understand, and it came later, was there was, you think about, you guys are probably taught this image, the whole iceberg picture, an iceberg, the tip of it's above the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize I had a whole lot of stuff still under the water. And I think as I got baptized in the Spirit, that I moved into ministry stuff, and that kind of took off. And and then I kind of thought, and this is what I was taught at the time: get your thinking right, and everything else will work. You know what I mean? Like get clear, start trying to think like God wants you to think, and everything will be clear. So for a long time, I was just kind of cruising in life, and I was engaging mission and life, and getting married and all this. But then things just started percolating. Things started trying to come up inside. Or I was dealing with intense feelings like isolation, feeling alone, feeling a bit afraid at times, feeling confused, feeling disconnected from everybody emotionally. Everybody, at times. It was an up and down thing. It wasn't a constant thing. But when it came, it was disturbing, and so I didn't know what to do about it, but I would just kind of press into it. And I got some advice from some guys that say, hey, sort of like in a nutshell, hey, we all got troubles, trust God, keep moving. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a little simplistic, but it was a little bit like that. And tough it out, go, this is what, and so that's what I did for a long time. And then it kind of got worse over time. And so I'll just close with this. This is what this led to. The reason I'm getting to this is I think probably the biggest wound in me, and I have to thank Bob for somebody gave me, Father Steve Mattson gave me Healing the Whole Person. And the whole person piece is something I didn't understand fully until I read his book. And I was in my late 50s when I did that already, so there's a lot of time kind of going through that. And I understood that the mind and the will were supposed to be engaged, but I somehow wasn't paying attention to the deeper parts of my own heart and the cry of my own heart, And there's a variety of reasons for that. But in a nutshell, I'd read the book and immediately got in touch with Bob, and then sought out a counselor in the area. And I learned something about really the deepest wound in my life. I've never really shared this publicly before, other than with some friends, but was those early years of my life, the Lord was trying to lead me to say, there's a reason for all that happened in all those early years. Being held back in third grade. I remember I got held back in third grade because my conduct in class was so bad. Mm-hmm. But also, all they said to me was, okay, you're going to repeat third grade. And that's basically all I did. But what ended up happening, you guys, was I was meeting with this counselor, and he said, why don't we just go back? Why don't you just place yourself in a situation, those early years, and I saw myself on the playground at Holy Trinity Cathedral, where we played outside every day. And I was standing there, and I looked to in the distance, and there was a tree where we always used to play around as little guys. I remember in first, second grade, and I saw myself with a circle of friends, and I'd never done this kind of imaging before, and then he said, just invite Jesus to come into that moment, So there's Jesus on the playground standing next to the boys, and then he gets. It's hard. It's funny. You can say that, like me as a little boy, Jesus gets his attention and takes him by the hand, and he wants to bring him over to me. And little Peter won't move, so to speak. And Jesus said, what's the matter? And he points at me, little Peter points at me and goes, he's ashamed of me.
Mm.
He doesn't like me, you know?
Mm.
And you guys, something broke in me.
Yeah.
Mm.
I must have cried, bawling my eyes out for 30 minutes in this guy's office.
Wow.
And he just said, just let Jesus help you now. Just let Jesus, and there was a revelation there. It was absolutely true. Because I had, before school started, I had problems with reading, probably was dyslexic and all kinds, not dyslexic, but I was very much an ADD. They probably would have diagnosed me as an ADD kid sort of thing. I don't know. But anyway, so I remember that, like, I had to have help in reading. And I think I was, the experience of those first early years of school and the trouble I had in school. One day when I was in first grade, you guys, I stood up in class and I just started raging against the teacher. And she came, she said, "None," and she chased me all around the classroom, and little girls were crying in the classroom. And the janitor came to try to grab me and he couldn't catch me.
Wow.
And then my dad, all of a sudden the door opened and my dad was standing there.
Wow.
And the whole room froze.
Mm.
And Dad just said, "Sister, everything's going to be all right. Son, come with me." And so we went home. And in those days, the old German community, here was the pastoral leadership. He kicked me in the rear end and said, "Don't you ever do that again." And that's the end of it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So I know that what ended up happening, the wound there was, for me in those early years in particular, was a lot of embarrassment and shame about public failure in school. And then third grade, I got cut off from all my classmates. And you're just all of a sudden in a different world. And then I was stood between two worlds. And that world that I stood in between was a world that I felt a lot of shame. And I was afraid of failing, And so, and feeling isolated and all that stuff and being different. And so there was a wound there. And then a belief thing sort of grew up inside me. And this is where Bob helped me a lot was, I felt like there were certain things I can't do. I don't want to try this because I'm going to fail if I do. I don't want to be exposed that I'm afraid. I'm afraid of failing, And and there's certain areas like sports and other things where I excelled. It never bothered me at all. But this thing was kind of inside me. And so as I got older, the combination of that wound and then something Bob said to me when we were having dinner when he was in Ann Arbor one night, and I was kind of sharing my story. And he said, "Do you mind?" His gentle way. He said, I think I was having a steak. I don't remember. We were sitting there having a nice conversation. He said, "Do you mind if I share, just an observation with you, Peter?" And I said, "Sure." And he goes, "I think you've internalized your father's self-hatred." And I said, "Could I get the check, please?"
Yeah, no kidding.
No. And it was like a laser shot because I really did, go back to the image of the little boy saying, "He doesn't like me. He's ashamed of me." I had so much shame around my early years of life, being the only of the 7 kids in the family that had any trouble in school at all. And then I found myself gravitating socially to guys on the fringe and living on the fringe, the only one who did that in the family, testing authority constantly, all that sort of stuff. So that was the wound. And then I had a belief system around it. And then I made vows. I'm not going to take certain risks. I'm not going to do certain things. I'm not going to put myself in places of vulnerability without even thinking about it. Here's the deal. This stuff and this is what I want to share, is like the wisdom that's coming from your ministry, you guys, is so helpful. I didn't think this stuff through. It was just the way my life was working. You know what I mean? It was a coping mechanisms and all that kind of stuff. And so there was that actual shame was still living in there. It wasn't just shame about my dad. There was a deeper level of the way I was looking at myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that no matter what I did, I could be speaking in front of 10,000 people and hit a home run or something, you know what I mean? And there's something inside me. If it's not the right moment, I'll tell you, there's something inside like, that was not enough. That was not good enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a painful thing. That just like takes away it's hard to kind of have joy in what God is doing. Sometimes it's there, but sometimes it's not. So I had to come to the point, even in my late 50s, you guys, because I'd say, look, I look at my life and God is blessing my life. I'm not in sin. I'm not doing the stuff I did when I was younger. I'm living in a lot of grace and freedom. Why do I need more healing? You know what I mean? Well, it's because I had this traumatic reality inside me that I never really understood or looked at. And this is the healing of the whole person, and things like unresolved traumas and stuff like that. This is real. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not just a matter of saying, okay, I get it. I'm moving on. Let's go. It's not like that. You better pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it absolutely can cripple you. And it can just drain. And the emotional and mental energy it takes to carry the burden of leadership, broad leadership, international leadership, with this inside, with a little guy inside who is so broken and wants to be known and loved and wants me, it sounds so weird. It wants me to love him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
And to be for myself in a good way. Do you know what I mean? So this has gigantic implications in terms of leadership,
Wow.
And so anyway, I think I literally have talked nonstop. You guys, you probably want to ask
It's been
questions,
awesome.
so I'm sorry.
Well, let me jump in a second here.
Yeah.
Awesome. You expressed it really well, Peter. The thing that's striking me as you're talking is, I've known your story because we've talked, but I think anybody in the world who knows your ministry knows that you have a gift of prophecy, a prophetic gifting, a prophetic anointing. And what I didn't know is that it started when you were 5 years old.
Yeah.
That you were in one way or another shouting to the world, things aren't okay. When everybody else was conforming, you were shouting, things aren't okay. And even as you share your whole story, it was you that your dad went to. It was you who spoke up to him when you were in that room. It was you who's continued to pursue the truth in these places of your heart. And, I just hear you shouting to the whole world right now saying, hey, everybody, this is necessary. This is needed. And this isn't crazy. This isn't arbitrary. This isn't extracurricular. This is essential. And so I just affirm, a lot of times the prophet in the Old Testament bore the wounds. And in a certain sense, you bore your father's wounds. And you spoke them, and you're bearing the wounds in the church and speaking them. And so just affirm you in that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was, Bob, it's funny. I noticed the exact same thing. The anointing being present and amidst the wounding, and you don't even see it or can't even help it, but it's there very early. And what's beautiful, what struck me is telling the truth is where breakthrough started to happen. And you're trying to tell the truth the whole way along in a little kid way, like essentially when little kids do that, right? Bob and I would, if somebody goes, hey, what's going on? And we got a kid running around a classroom. He's trying to communicate something. He's trying to tell something, but he's doing it in a little 5-year-old way. Right? He doesn't know how to go, everybody, can we just pause and stop and get a coffee and let's talk about what's happening at home? My father drinks and this is how it makes me. Kids don't know how to do that. So they're just trying to yell, something's off, something's not right. And you just have to decode it. I was just, because the whole way along, this man who's at a prayer meeting inserts himself in your life with a simple word, right? Like he had a word of knowledge or a word of prophecy, and God bless that man for having the
Oh man,
courage
yeah,
to step
Yeah.
up and talk to your sister,
yeah,
and then your sister to be so impacted by it, and then the dominoes started falling in a good way.
yeah.
And what strikes me is that so much of what's going on is truth telling.
Mhm.
You guys started to actually say what was true.
Yeah.
This isn't okay. This is hurting me. And what I love is that it happened for you in a familial way. And then the truth telling kept going for you deeper in your heart under the iceberg. You had to start being honest and tell the truth about like what was going on. Like it wasn't working. You said like, this way isn't working. I just was going along, but this wasn't working. And that's telling the truth
Yeah.
and pressing deeper in and being honest about the wounds. And then Jesus circles back around and goes like, I love you. This is what I do. This is who I am. Remember what I've done. Let's now go deeper with you. It's beautiful. I mean, it's just fascinating and wonderful.
I'm really grateful for the grace of God and the help of brothers and sisters to be able to face these kinds of challenges. And God's faithful in bringing the right people to us at the right time if we're open. And so one of the things I try to do as a leader myself is to create an environment and a culture where there's no stigma around, especially around men being able to face their pain.
Yeah.
And I do that by trying to just be personally transparent, just to be honest about real life. You know what I mean? And it's so easy. It is so easy in the church world to put on the mask of perfection. You know what I mean? And I think there's a great need. Anyway, I won't go down that trail, but being personally transparent, and creating an environment of honesty and affirming people who are honest in a good way. And as a leader, being attentive to it. The whole person, I keep going back, that phrase has helped me a lot. The whole person, not as just how are they doing at their work and how are they thinking about this or that. But,
Right.
And if you're dealing with your own stuff as a leader, it gives you a kind of sensitivity to the reality of it around you. And then having gone through it, you also are just continuing to work through it. You don't have to be afraid of it. Like I think guys don't want to get started because I am not opening that can of worms. That ain't happening around here. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I'm just going to keep a lid on all that. Or this isn't the right place for that. You know what I mean? Things like that. And so again, I think another way we do it is just pray with people. I work hard to try to help people get to where they need to go to get the help. Sometimes we provide the resources that it can happen for people. We connect them to the right people. And I'm really telling young people, I work with a lot of young leaders, and I say, you guys, I wish I would have started sooner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm probably on the Lord's clock. I don't know, but he probably reached out to me years earlier. And I could have faced some of this stuff, but I really was also, I was around a group of leaders who gave me many, many good things, but their unwillingness to deal with their own stuff, this was never part of the language. You know what I mean? It's just not part of it was not a world they stepped into. And you cannot lead people where you don't go. You know what I mean?
Amen.
And so
Amen.
what that means is it's the encountering Jesus in the healing again of the whole person doesn't happen. Your mind might get renewed more and certain positive things happen, but you have to be willing to live with a kind of raw honesty about, okay, what is going on inside me? What is moving to me, instead of saying, okay, I'm just going to file that. I'm going to file that. There's a message coming up, but I'm filing it because I'm moving on in the Lord and I'm a man of God and I'm building the kingdom and we're going for it. You know what I mean? This kind of stuff. Yeah. And I'm not going to worry about myself and all that. And there's just there's so much stigma around it that it builds so many lies and ways to avoid acting on it. And so, and I think it's really important I've talked to many leaders, bishops, priests, lay people over the years, and guys, there's such a risk of being vulnerable. Guys are so afraid to be vulnerable. And let me tell you, you can do it in a way that you don't lose your dignity and you don't get yourself in trouble. You know what I mean? Or whatever you can lead out of authentic encounter with the Lord. That's what you're speaking from. And then they're able to see a fuller living Jesus. a Jesus in the moment who meets us and who walks with us. You cannot have the joy and the freedom of a Christian, of a child of God, if you have the buried wound, you got buried trauma in your life that you've never dealt with. You can have moments of it for sure, but I'm talking about walking in peace, walking in the joy of the Lord, in a sense that everything's going to be okay. He's here, and I'm not afraid of anything, any wound, anything. I'm not. So I have to tell young people, don't be afraid. Young leaders, don't be afraid of your wounds and the stuff that you're hiding. Don't be afraid of your failure. Don't be afraid of your sin. Don't be the habit patterns of sin that you have. Maybe there's a message in there too. Yes, repent. Yes, go to confession. Yes, do all that. But okay, what's your heart crying for? What do you even know who you are? I mean, I didn't know, in my early years where I was, walking off into things I shouldn't have walked off into, I didn't know the cry of my own heart. I had no idea, and I didn't know I was escaping things either, so, hey, I want to thank you guys for that encouragement you gave. Something just came to my mind. At my dad's funeral was at the cathedral, and it was packed because he was well known in the city. He was quite a leader, and the bishop snuck in the back, but the bishop came to the funeral, and there were priests all over the place, and my siblings and my mom asked me to give a eulogy, and just one part of it, the center of it was, I said, you guys, you all knew my dad, all these older folk, you knew my dad as a leader, and he was strong and he was fearless in so many ways. And we all looked to you on the outside like we had our act together. But I want to tell you, because we had all these grandkids there and everybody's in the Lord, and people are like, what water do these people drink? Like, what is the deal? Like, how did this happen? And I just say, the reason this is here and the reason we found healing is because my dad was able to say, I'm sick. I need help.
Wow.
I said, it was the humility, it was God's grace. And I told a little bit about my sister's story there. But God's grace allowed my dad somehow, without his even fully understanding, to be honest about his brokenness. And I said, it wasn't my dad's victories that, like what you'd call his victories, his achievements that everybody wants to honor and recognize him for. It was that moment was the moment of hope for us. Wow. When our dad said, please help, when that war hero, when that man, the public leader, city councilman, all this stuff said, someone please help me. I need help, and that's where Jesus comes. That's where he came. And I got my siblings together, but thanks be to God, I've had some resources. And during COVID, I'm from the Twin Cities area, New Ulm, Minnesota. I got a big house right on Lake Calhoun and brought all my siblings together for the first time in 40 years. We were all able to be together with no spouses, no kids or anything. Wow. And we had a family video, my mom and dad, we did all kinds, and we prayed together each day, and we remembered and we talked. And my sister Kathy, who has got dementia, a little bit of dementia. They didn't think she was going to be able to get out, but we were able to get her out because we were all vaccinated, and she was there. They said, but only an hour. And she came alive there, and she was with us for like 5 hours. Wow. And she remembered, and she had moments of lucidity. And I said, Kathy, she was saying, this is so beautiful. I said, Kathy, what? It didn't happen without you saying yes to Jesus.
Wow.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen. Wow.
And it was just, and we were all looking at it. It was our brokenness that did this. It was God. It was God, And so
Peter, that's so powerful. Like there's two things you're saying, I think, that are so valuable for leaders, just to emphasize. You're, to me, giving an example of Jesus saying, when people say, but we prophesied in your name, but we did all of these things, and he said, I never knew you. You're nuancing the difference, I think, where leaders who are wholehearted are leaders who've operated in the supernatural capacity of God and who are operating in deep, real, authentic relationship with him. Because the nuance that Jesus mentions there is you can still go in front of the 5,000 and do miraculous things. In other words, Jesus will still work through you in your brokenness, but that doesn't mean you know him. That distinction
That's for
for me
sure.
for leaders is absolutely critical.
Yeah, that's very true.
Absolutely. And the nuance you're making, I think, is really powerful because you're nuancing that, yeah, you can still get up front, but it might not mean you still know the Lord. And I think we get distracted by that. Well, look at what I did. Therefore, that must mean I'm good with God and I'm just going to keep moving on. And that to me is an important dynamic for leaders to notice. You might have these evidences that you reference that everything's okay. I just gave a great talk. I just led my staff through blah, blah, blah. But Jesus says really clearly, I didn't know you. And there's a difference there. That's one thing. The other thing you're saying, I think, is just fascinating is acknowledging your sickness is the catalyst to transformation. Mm-hmm. That can be so difficult for people and so hard. Bob and I were just in a meeting with some very high level leaders, and the topic of failure came up. And it was a group of men. Every single man in the group said, I struggle with the fear of failure. Every one of them, we all said the same thing. We all have this fear of being inadequate and fearing failure. And it just made me go, it's everywhere. Like this dynamic is everywhere. So when people are hearing your story and they go, that's not really me, I would encourage an extra level of reflection because it's so common, especially in men. That dynamic that you described, that maybe there's something else motivating you. And if that isn't addressed, we can operate out of a place of fearing failure, that then becomes performance. And now we're performing or earning a relationship with God. You know, you're on the stage of life trying to earn the praise of the people who are out there, and you can compromise things very quickly. And then if you feel like you're not getting what you need, you go to the side stage and get a little bit of whatever you need. And that's usually where the sins happen and all the backdoor behind the scenes junk in our lives happen. So I love just coming out full out, authentic. That's where healing happens. It's powerful. It's really beautiful.
And I think one of the things that I've learned, it was sad at times to think about it, but I had to let that go, is, when you're walking through life and you have that unresolved stuff internally that the Lord really wants to go after in your life, like in my case, it affected how I looked at myself, which means it affected how I looked at God somewhat, and affected how I looked at the people in my life, And so the whole reality and why the whole person needs to get healed is because the central thing we're all made for is to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. If I hate little Peter inside myself, it's gonna skew my optic of how I see God, how I see my spouse, how I see other people, and I'm not loving myself, the way God wants me to. Do you know what I mean? Because I could say, okay, Lord, I'm going to obey you, I'm going to love myself, but the reality is, if there's something inside it says, no, actually, why? In the first 17, 16 years of my life, did I behave this way? Why did I do this? What's wrong with you? You know what I mean? Like an underlying self awareness of like lack of healthy self-esteem. I don't know what the language you put on it, but the bottom line is that affects my capacity to know God, to love neighbor, and therefore the joy and the peace and the awareness of being loved by God is so deeply affected by that, which is why leaders burn out. A lot of leaders burn out. They have charisms and they have natural gifting and they have charisms, and God doesn't revoke his gifts and all that. So you keep moving in them. But the bottom line is you're going to crash and burn if you're not paying attention to your heart and you're understanding yourself as a broken human being. We're all weak and broken people, and the King is there. He wants to go right to the heart of that. So stop hiding it from him. Stop hiding it from other people. Stop, living out of this fear of a stigma and all the rest of that. to your point, where everybody's trying to, but if I get vulnerable, but if I do that, this whole edifice is coming down. If it happens, I'm going to lose my place, or I'm going to lose my influence, or I'm going to be a nobody, or I'm going to live in shame. Oh, the devil's lies just coming at you. He does not want you to surrender in brokenness and humility. You know what I mean? And so, yeah.
Beautiful. That prophetic voice shouting it to the world. So just as we get ready to bring this to closure, as we talked about those 4 different areas of how brokenness affected your leadership, how healing has affected your leadership, how you bring healing into ministry, and how that impacts leading. Is there anything that you wanted to share that you haven't had a chance to share yet?
Just to leaders, just to be able to, I think in the heart of every leader, he does want to create a family environment, an environment of love. And I mean, any guy who's even leading a company wants people to be able to care for each other and love for one another. And so just know that the Lord wants that for you too. And if you're not living it and something's holding you back, trust God wants to lead you deeper into that dimension of your life as a leader, especially in the church, to church leaders who are maybe listening to this, is he wants you to build the family of God. He wants you to be spiritual fathers or spiritual leaders in that way. And you don't have to be afraid of being vulnerable. You're not going to lose your status, or you know what I mean? Status isn't the right word. You're not going to lose your dignity, if you just speak honestly and love people and give people permission. They'll open their hearts. They'll, as a leader, you can't help it. You're going to lead them somewhere. You're going to influence them in some direction. You're going to do something. Influence them in this way that gives them permission to be trusting in a living God, and that friendship as brothers and sisters, the building the family of God, can happen. So a lot of people living in silos in the church too, including our brother bishops and priests who we love. A lot of guys very, very lonely, very, very. So they need to hear this kind of stuff, and trust the Lord can help them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so. Peter, where could people go to just hear more from you, and like where could people like just see? I know. I mean, just type in your name in Google, right? That's a start. But where else?
Come over to my house if you want.
Amen.
Renewalministries.net. You can find us there.
Yeah. And
I know.
Your YouTube.
Go ahead.
You're
Bob.
doing weekly YouTube
videos too. You can. Yeah, people can find us there too. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say. You can type in Peter Herbeck or Renewal Ministries into YouTube, and you get all kinds of great stuff that comes up. Peter, I just want to say on behalf of Bob and I, thank you very much. Thank you. Of course, thank you for your leadership, but I think especially in light of what we're trying to hone in on here, thank you for your yes to getting underneath the surface, and then the fruitfulness that comes from your ministry, because you're cleaning up things that are behind the scenes or the invisible stuff that, I mean, it gives hope to the church and sets an example that this is possible and it's real. And Jesus is who he says he is. It's not a fairy tale. Mm-hmm. So we're very, very grateful for you, and thank you for your ministry and your yes, and thanks for being with us on the podcast. So listeners, you can go to all those places that we just laid out, where you can find more about Peter. And again, listeners, if you have heard this and this has impacted you, we really want to encourage you to trust in the Lord and move forward. Step into the dynamics that seem like it's impossible. God meets you there and can do incredible things. The gospel is real. There's good news there. So once again, thanks, Peter, and we look forward to all that you continue to offer the church. Listeners, we'll talk to you again soon, and God bless you.